I remember the exact time everything went sideways. 2:13 a.m. That's when Mrs. Duncan's monitor started shrieking, sending me sprinting down the ICU hallway. In the flickering fluorescent glare, her face looked gray, almost ashen. CPR protocol kicked in and I was counting compressions, but my mind was somewhere else, scanning for the cause. She'd been stable an hour ago. I'm Evelyn Ortega, an RN fresh out of training, drowning in student debt and overworked shifts. When I landed this gig, I told myself I was lucky. It's one of the biggest hospitals in New Jersey, with a decent wage and the promise of overtime. I should have known it came with fine print. Mrs. Duncan didn't make it. After the code team called time of death, I noted the IV bag still dripping into her arm. Something gnawed at me. Her chart indicated no high-risk meds, just a standard: saline solution and mild pain relief. The bag was half full. So where did everything go so wrong? I was restocking supplies in the hallway when Trevor Green stepped out of the adjacent room. He's a senior nurse, with a decade of experience and a face devoid of real expression. I've caught him staring at me, as if he's dissecting my every move. I felt his eyes on me even before I saw him. He offered a curt nod, then checked a chart. "Busy night," he remarked, voice flat. That was it. No sadness, no frustration, nothing about the patient who just died. Just a dull statement. "Too busy," I replied. My pulse hammered in my neck. I wasn't sure if I was just projecting, but a surge of suspicion left me uneasy. After all, I'd heard rumors in passing. Unexplained codes, messed up medication, logs. Half the staff was too exhausted to connect dots. I forced myself to stay professional, but my heart pounded so loud I worried he'd hear it. Trevor set a new IV bag on the supply cart. "We do what we can," he said. Then he moved past me with that mechanical stride. I noticed the label on the bag he placed. It didn't match the standard brand we used, but I had more pressing tasks. Mrs. Duncan's post-mortem paperwork, calling family, preparing the bed for the next patient. The hospital never sleeps, not even after someone dies. By the end of my shift, I was bone-tired, yet adrenaline kept me on edge. Something about Trevor's apathy clung to my thoughts. As I trudged to the locker room at dawn, I dismissed my suspicions. Everyone processes death differently, right? But I couldn't get rid of the sour taste in my mouth. When I looked back, at the corridor, Trevor stood at the far end, watching me again. Cold, predatory, like he was measuring how much I'd seen. The next night started calmly. Too calmly. The ICU was short-staffed, as usual, and management had me floating between the cardiac step-down unit and a medical surgical overflow. My steps echoed in the deserted hallways. Each door I passed displayed patients in various states of sedation or post-op haze. Around 1 a.m., I received a call from the charge nurse, Elaine, asking if I'd cover a break in ICU. I found Trevor there, prepping a medication tray. Watching him made my stomach twist. Not out of fear exactly, but from an acute sense that he was the center of every hushed conversation I'd overheard in the break room. Whispers about staff refusing to work with him. Cryptic remarks about incidents. We had a critical patient with respiratory failure. Trevor handed me a labeled syringe, telling me it was a sedative. The label looked official enough, same font, standard hospital brand. Something bugged me, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Then he asked in that flat tone, "You new to nights?" "About 3 months," I replied, sliding the syringe into the IV port. The patient's lids flickered, and I double-checked the monitor. Heart rate dropping. I pulled back. "They're bradying down," I said, alarmed. "What's the dose on this?" Trevor leaned over my shoulder. Standard sedation, 2 ml/hour. But the heart monitor continued a slow, relentless decline. He pressed the code bell, oddly calm. The code team swarmed in. We stabilized the patient after several tense minutes. After the chaos, Trevor's demeanor remained indifferent. He charted the incident as an unexpected reaction. I stared at him, my nerves on fire. "You sure that was 2 milligram?" I asked. He shrugged. "Check the label if you don't believe me." I snatched the leftover vial from the med cart. It had the correct label, but something about the lot number seemed off. I didn't have time to investigate further. Calls came in for another patient crashing 3 rooms down. By dawn, we'd lost 2 more. One to a massive pulmonary embolism, another to mysterious organ failure. 3 unexplained near deaths, plus 2 actual losses in a single shift. Even for ICU standards, that was abnormally high. Elaine muttered about a run of bad luck, but I wasn't convinced. I caught Trevor disposing of medication vials in the thumb sharp spin with practiced swiftness, never meeting my eyes. Clocking out, I carried this oppressive sense that I was missing vital pieces of a puzzle. That maybe we didn't just lose these patients. But I had 0 proof, and a mountain of hospital politics towered over any rash accusations. Could a nurse, someone sworn to care, really be capable of intentionally ending lives? The question gnawed at me all the way home. 2 days later, I arrived early to check the pharmacy records. My shift was on the same ICU floor, and I wanted to see if the sedation logs matched our usage. I didn't want to rouse suspicions, so I played it casual, greeting the pharmacy techs with a half smile. "Big weekend, huh?" "The place must be slammed," I joked, leaning on the counter as if I was just passing time. On the monitor behind them, I saw lines of medication requests. One column stuck out: sedatives. The volumes ordered this month had tripled compared to last. I asked the tech, Carla, about it. She shrugged. New protocols, maybe? Or nurses forgetting to sign out meds properly? She paused, then lowered her voice. Though I've heard rumors about theft, people messing with IV bags. My pulse kicked up. Who do they suspect? Carla gave me a guarded look. You know how it goes. Management hushes it up. I'm just a tech. I don't ask too many questions. I thanked her and hurried off, scanning the hallway for Trevor. He was nowhere to be seen. Then I spotted Elaine, the charge nurse, reading a chart near the nurse's station. I approached carefully. Have you noticed an uptick in sedation use? I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. Her lips pressed together. Keep your head down, Evelyn. She tapped the chart. This hospital likes to bury problems, not solve them. That was a red flag. Normally, Elaine was all about protocols and guidelines. The fact she was so cagey told me there was more to this than meets the eye. My scalp prickled with mounting dread. I realized I was stepping onto dangerous ground. Accusing a nurse of murder, even in my own mind, was insane without hard evidence. Mid-shift, I was assigned to a patient named Mr. Tobias, who'd come in for routine surgery but developed an infection. He was stable by all accounts, temp down, vitals normal. After finishing my assessment, I hung a fresh IV bag of normal saline. The label matched the standard solution. Then I caught Trevor pacing near the supply room, fiddling with something in his pocket. I spied a glint of metal, a syringe. He slipped inside the supply room. My heart thundered, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm. It felt like a crossroads, either risk everything by confronting him or pretend ignorance and move on. I turned back to Mr. Tobias's room. Less than an hour later, that dreaded monitor alarm filled the hallway again. Mr. Tobias was gasping, eyes rolling. His oxygen plummeted. I shouted for help, practically diving for suction. Trevor appeared behind me, too relaxed for the moment, and suggested it was an allergic reaction. But I'd done the entire intake. There was no known allergy. I locked eyes with him, and he gave me the most disconcerting half-smile. Not an ounce of genuine concern in it. We stabilized Mr. Tobias, but the seed of suspicion was now a full-grown horror in my mind. Trevor Green was tampering with IV bags, and if I didn't expose him, more people would die. Determined to gather proof, I decided to stay late after my shift. I wanted to watch the supply room, see who went in and out. I told no one, especially not Elaine, because I sensed even she might discourage me from pushing further. The hospital had a history of ignoring bad apples to avoid lawsuits. If Trevor was truly lethal, I had to catch him in the act. Hiding in the corridor near the supply room felt surreal, like I'd stepped out of my own life. My nerves were shot, adrenaline pumping. I tried distracting myself by imagining my mother's relief if she could retire once I established myself in a stable nursing job. But that future felt distant while I crouched near a half-lit hallway, heart drumming in my ears. Shortly before midnight, I saw Trevor's silhouette glide across the hall. He glanced around, then slipped inside the supply room. My pulse hammered. I waited a solid 2 minutes, each second stretching like taffy. Then I pressed my ear to the door. Shuffling sounds, the rustle of plastic wrappings, a faint click, as if a syringe cap was being removed. I flung the door open, phone in hand to snap a picture. The overhead light flickered on, revealing shelves of IV bags, and Trevor turning with a half-filled syringe. He froze, expression morphing into something monstrous. For a split second, neither of us moved. He recovered first. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, fumbling to pocket the syringe. I snapped a photo, but I was shaking so hard I wasn't sure it captured anything. "You're done," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "I'm reporting you." He lunged toward me, grabbing my wrist. "Don't be reckless," he whispered, his breath sour with tension. "You'll destroy your career if you spread lies." "It's not a lie," I retorted, jabbing my elbow into his ribs. He let go momentarily. I bolted out the door, phone clutched against my chest. He didn't chase me. I sprinted to the nurse manager's office, only to find it locked. I hammered on it, fear pounding in my veins. No answer. The entire corridor was deserted. Night shift staff mostly busy with patients or holed up in corners trying to catch a breather. Before I could figure my next move, Trevor strolled up behind me with surprising calm. "You're not going to turn me in?" he said softly. "People have tried. The hospital always covers it up. They'll fire you, blackball you, and I'll get hired somewhere else. That's how this system works." My rage flared white-hot. "Not this time," I breathed, but he just shrugged, gave me that disturbingly placid stare, and walked away, as if we just had a minor disagreement over shift duties. I tried to call the police from a staff phone at the nurses' station, but my supervisor, Miriam, saw me and disconnected the call. "This needs to go through official channels," she said nervously. "We have a process." A process that I knew would bury any real investigation. With trembling hands, I realized Trevor was correct. This hospital had a track record of quietly resolving issues to avoid legal nightmares. Yet I refused to be complicit. I had a photo. Maybe it was blurry, but it was something. I resolved to see this through, no matter the repercussions. The next shift was a blur of near emergencies. 3 more patients crashed unexpectedly: a woman in for gallbladder surgery, a post-op pneumonia patient, and a man awaiting a heart transplant. Each time, Trevor was conveniently on hand to assist, charting these incidents as allergic reactions or unforeseen complications. I confronted Elaine about it in a deserted hallway. "We have multiple mysterious codes, all on Trevor's." "Watch," I snapped. "Don't you see the pattern?" Her gaze darted around, checking if anyone overheard. She whispered, "He's been reported before. Last time our managers quietly dismissed him, but the nursing shortage is so severe they brought him back. This place would rather risk a few unexplained fatalities than have a short floor." A cold flush swept over me. This wasn't negligence. It was calculated indifference. My voice trembled. "You can't be serious," she hushed me. "You have a bright future here. Don't let yourself get tangled in accusations no one will believe," I nearly screamed. Instead, I marched down the hall to the HR department. phone in hand. I demanded to speak with the hospital director. Security blocked my path. They insisted. I wait for an appointment. My heart hammered so hard my hands shook. Trevor passed by, eyes sliding over me with triumphant ease. I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to lash out physically. HR eventually ushered me into a sterile meeting room. The director, Ms. Pemberton, sat behind a glossy table, flanked by a lawyer type. They asked me to detail my concerns. I described everything: the suspicious codes, the tampered IV bags, the photo I'd taken. They looked at the image with polite skepticism. Ms. Pemberton gave me a bland corporate smile. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll launch an internal investigation immediately." I knew a brush-off when I heard one. Internal investigation? The man is murdering patients. My voice cracked with frustration. The lawyer tapped a pen on the table. "We understand your worries, Ms. Ortega. However, you must realize that making such an extreme accusation without concrete evidence can have serious repercussions." I stormed out, disillusioned. They wanted to bury me, not Trevor. By the time I returned to the ICU floor, my badge access was revoked. I was locked out. A security guard escorted me to my locker. My protest fell on deaf ears. "Go home," the guard mumbled, eyes down, as if ashamed. Trevor's voice echoed in my head. "They'll fire you, blackball you, and I'll get hired somewhere else." I slammed my locker shut, tears burning my eyes. This hospital would sooner protect a murderer than risk a lawsuit, but I refused to let it end there. I arrived home to find my phone blowing up with texts from coworkers, some outraged on my behalf, others cautioning me to walk away for my own safety. One message stood out. "He's done this before. Check the local paper archives." Within an hour, I was hunched over a microfilm reader at the public library. Dust particles floated in the dim overhead light as I scrolled through old newspaper reels. A half-buried article from 5 years ago mentioned Trevor Green's real name, Trevor McAllister. He was investigated at a hospital across the county, line after a string of suspicious patient deaths. No charges were filed, but he quietly resigned. Then he reappeared in another facility under the last name Green, then another. Each time, he left behind a cluster of unexplained codes. Paper trail in hand, I called the local police department. They transferred me to a detective who'd heard the rumors, but insisted there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. "Hospitals aren't cooperating," he said tiredly. "We can't prosecute on rumors." I demanded they come see my photo. He said they needed something more concrete, like tampered vials or a confession. I slammed the phone down, seething. Another message pinged on my phone, a colleague from the ICU. She typed, "You're on the schedule tonight. HR must not have updated the system. If you show up, you might still get inside." It was a Hail Mary, but I needed to gather direct proof. Maybe snag an IV bag Trevor had adulterated. My career was essentially ruined here, so what did I have to lose? If I secured physical evidence, I could hand it directly to law enforcement. By midnight, I slipped into the hospital in street clothes, a hoodie pulled over my head. My old badge didn't open the main doors, but an aide I trusted let me in through the loading dock. My heart hammered like a war drum as I crept down the service corridors to the ICU supply room. The place reeked of antiseptic and stale coffee. The overhead lights were partially dimmed, casting long shadows. Peeking through the small supply room window, I saw no movement. Summoning courage, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Racks of IV bags, neatly labeled, lined the walls. I skimmed the labels, searching for anything that appeared tampered with. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped one. I spotted faint pinpricks in the packaging, signs of a needle insertion not from the factory. My pulse raced. This was it. Physical proof. Suddenly the door clicked shut behind me, and I heard the lock engage. I whirled around. Trevor stood there, face slack, but eyes burning with intensity. You just can't let it go, can you? He advanced slowly. My heart pounded as I realized I was cornered. No one else was around. And if I screamed, would anyone even help? Trevor snatched the IV bag from my hands. His tone was almost paternal. I'd hoped you'd walk away. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across his face, revealing a cold detachment. I pressed against the metal shelves, trying to keep distance. You're killing people, I hissed, voice trembling. I won't let you do it anymore. His lips curled into a semblance of a smile. Do you know how easy it is to hide behind medical complications? Patients die all the time in hospitals. No one questions a nurse with a calm demeanor. And when they do, he shrugged. Administration buries it. They'd rather I vanish than risk a scandal. My mind reeled. Why? I managed to choke out. You swore to save lives. Trevor's expression hardened. I realized early on how fragile we are. One injection, one mislabeling. The power is intoxicating. He flexed his grip on the tampered IV bag. You'll never prove anything. Even if you do, the hospital will block it. It's happened before. It'll happen again. Desperation flooded me. I lunged for the door, but he grabbed my arm and twisted it back, forcing me onto my knees. Pain tore through my shoulder. No more heroics, he muttered, rummaging through his pocket with his free hand. I pictured a syringe, a lethal dose. My skin crawled. Then, a sudden pounding reverberated on the supply room door. Maintenance! A voice called from outside. Need to check the AC vent. Trevor stiffened. In that split second, I wrenched free, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. I scrambled for my phone, still in my hoodie pouch. I fumbled to hit the E, flashlight shining it in his eyes. He hissed, momentarily blinded. I hurled the door open, nearly colliding with a startled maintenance worker. Call security, I shouted, voice cracking. Trevor shoved past me, darting down the hall. Fear snapped through me. If he vanished now, he'd pop up at another hospital. Another wave of deaths. I sprinted after him. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor as I chased him through a labyrinth of corridors. Nurses gawped at us, confused. Trevor reached the stairwell, yanking the door open, but I hurled my body against it. We tumbled onto the landing, grappling for control. He jammed, his elbow into my ribs, and agony ripped through me. Suddenly, a pair of security guards rushed in. They grabbed Trevor, forcing him to the ground. One guard recognized me, eyes wide with shock. I shouted about the tampered IV bag in the supply room. The guard nodded and radioed for backup. My breath came in ragged gasps. Trevor lay pinned, calm as ever, like an animal feigning sedation. In that moment, I felt sure justice would be served at last. By the time dawn broke, the supply room was swarming with uniformed officers and hospital administrators in stiff suits. My statement was taken 4 times. I handed over the tampered IV bag with the needle puncture. The cops found syringes in Trevor's locker, plus suspicious vials. Evidence, plain as day. I waited in the corridor outside HR, arms wrapped around my aching ribs. Finally, Ms. Pemberton emerged, looking grim. We appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Ortega. We'll be placing you on administrative leave. Paid, of course, until the investigation concludes. I stared at her, disbelieving. I just stopped a serial killer, and your biggest concern is a PR move? Her lips tightened. We must handle this delicately. Our hospital's reputation is at stake. I wanted to laugh, cry, and scream all at once. The hypocrisy was suffocating. But I'd won a small battle. Trevor was arrested, evidence in hand. That was the only outcome that mattered. A detective approached, exhaustion etched on his face. We suspect he's done this at other hospitals, he said quietly. We'll see how many bodies are linked to him. He gave me a nod of respect. You might have saved lives tonight. As I left, I caught a glimpse of Trevor being let out in cuffs. He turned his head, meeting my gaze with an unsettling calm that made my heart stutter. Something about his eyes hinted that this wasn't over, that the system enabling him would keep churning. Days later, the news headlines exploded. Nurse arrested in connection to dozens of mysterious deaths. Investigators believed the toll might reach the hundreds. Other hospitals had let him go without pressing charges, preferring to hide behind bureaucratic smokescreens. Sitting in my small apartment, I stared at the TV in numb shock. My job at that hospital was gone. They'd never let me return after the PR firestorm. But in a twisted sense, I felt relief. Better to be blackballed than complicit in mass murder. Then the phone rang, an unknown number. When I answered, a reporter asked if I could speak on record about Trevor Green's crimes. She'd heard rumors that hospital management had suppressed earlier complaints. My pulse thudded in my ears, remembering how it felt when he pinned me to the supply room floor. I spoke carefully, trying to remain composed. If my story could bring accountability, I owed it to those who never got a chance to speak. The dead deserved justice, and I needed closure, or at least some sense of purpose in the chaos. I ended the call and gazed at the window, the early morning sun cutting across my living room. My reflection looked weary but resolved. The nightmares would linger, sterile corridors, beeping monitors, Trevor's vacant eyes. But at least I'd pulled the curtain on his blood-soaked career. Still, the final chill in my spine came from the realization that a system built to heal had allowed him to hunt for so long. If one nurse could exploit the cracks, how many others lurked out there, waiting for the perfect night shift to slip another lethal dose into an unsuspecting patient? That question will haunt me forever. You made it to the end, but are you sure the story's over? Some things have a way of sticking with you, creeping back in when you least expect it. If you want more nightmares, there's another story waiting for you right here. But don't say I didn't warn you. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? Or maybe the better question is, what would you do if this ever happened to you? Subscribe if you haven't already. Just don't blame me when you start sleeping with the lights on.